on writing and health. And I have the honor to introduce 3 amazing women writers whose work we have in the collection and whose work I deeply admire. One of the great things about my job is getting to meet wonderful creative women. And so I think you'll enjoy the panelists that we have today. I will introduce them in order of how they're seated and how they will appear. Mihku Paul is a Maliseet writer and artist born and raised in Maine. She grew up on the Penobscot River and received both a traditional indigenous education and one through the predominantly white public school system. She is the author, creator of a one-woman installation at the Abbey Museum, Look Twice, the Wabanaki, in Image and Verse. Excuse me. Mihku holds a BA in Human Development and Communication and is a 2010 graduate of the Stone Coast MFA program in creative writing. She has worked as a cultural consultant in Portland Public Schools for more than 20 years. She is the author of 20th Century Powwow Playland, a collection of poetry, and another recent credit includes a chapter in Transforming Our Practices, a pedagogy text focused on Indigenous educational paradigms. Seated next to Mihku is Mira Ptacin. She's the author of Pour Your Soul, winner of the 2016 Maine Literary Award and a Kirkus Best Book of 2016. She lives on Peaks Island, Maine with her family and is working on her forthcoming book, The In-Betweens, from Live Right Publishing. To read more of her works, visit her website, which is in the program, so I won't tell you the URL. You can find it in her bio. And then Lee Sharkey is the author of Walking Backwards, Calendars of Fire, A Darker, Sweeter String, and 8 other full-length poetry books and chapbooks. Her work has appeared in Crazy Horse, Field, Kenyon Review, Massachusetts Review, Nimrod, Pleiades, Seattle Review, and many other literary journals. Her recognitions include the Ballymaloe International Poetry Prize, the Abraham Sutzkever Centennial Translation Prize, the Maine Arts Commission's Fellowship in Literary Arts, the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance's Distinguished Achievement Award, the Rhino Editors Prize, and Zone 3's Rainmaker Award in Poetry. She leads a creative writing workshop for adults recovering from mental illness and serves as senior editor of the Beloit Poetry Journal. So, welcome, Mihku.
Good morning. I did not plan on doing this extemporaneously, so bear with me. What you're looking at now is an image of me at age 8. From where I stand, Indigenous culture in the 21st century includes both the beautiful ongoing renaissance of traditional lifeways and the horrific legacy of oppression, racism, and genocide. To be born Indigenous is to be born with the serious chronic condition of multi-generational trauma and all the risk factors that accompany it. How can we heal ourselves? Our bodies are magnificent machines capable of extreme resilience, but also vulnerable to subtle damage that occurs over time. Neuroscience and epigenetics are beginning to reveal how our bodies are repositories of historical trauma and violence. Indigenous leaders have been saying this for decades, striving to help others understand the condition of so many of our people. Now we find that researchers are beginning to see things like altered stress hormone profiles in descendants of Holocaust survivors. I'm speaking now, you probably are familiar with Rachel Yehuda's work, but there's a lot of work going on right now with epigenetics. Yehuda states, the message of the study is that we respond to our environments in multiple ways that can have long-lasting transformative effects. The implications are that what happens to our parents, or perhaps even our grandparents or previous generations, may help shape who we are on a fundamental molecular level that contributes to our behaviors, our beliefs, our strengths, and vulnerabilities. Most indigenous cultures believe in ancestral memory. We always have and always will. And that's typically defined as memory present at birth, which exists in the absence of sensory experience and is incorporated into the genome over time. For indigenous people, ancestral memory is both a source of strength and an Achilles heel. To fully benefit from our cultural strengths, we must first heal from the effects of the historical trauma we've suffered. I'm going to move that next. Uh-oh. Did it come up? Yeah, it did. Oh, thank you. I'm tech challenged. Okay, so in the Western medical tradition, it seems healing is often described, as a specific biological process. It's finite, it's linear. As an indigenous woman, I would describe my own healing as a path, which implies that it continues onward and has not been fully revealed. I have a mind, a body, and a spirit. And to heal and be whole requires that I attend to all three. My people are storytellers, and this approach has been used for thousands of years. The story in this picture is that every Easter I got a new set of clothes. And so this is a particular Easter when I was maybe 10, outside our little ramshackle house at the bottom of a dead-end street, and we always took a picture on that day. My mother adored hats. My people are storytellers, so our value systems, they're embedded in our stories, and the stories carry important cultural information forward in a connective and non-threatening way. Therefore, it feels entirely natural for me to engage in story as a path to awareness and understanding. How to begin? I was sent to college, I started to write, and everything changed. In my 20s, I started to share parts of my story with trusted individuals. I started counseling. Through the sharing of story, the terrible burden of a difficult past lightened. Haunted by life events and a confused identity, I began to integrate myself. I was someone with a history, a narrative, simply the story of what happened. Over time, I developed a clearer sense of the trajectory I had taken and became better able to assess my present condition with compassion and a fuller awareness. That's coming up. This is Thursdays at 6. Disordered memory, untethered, its own beginnings fallen to pieces. Words decay, come to rest as debris beneath our feet. Fragments careen and cartwheel through moments drawn, then redrawn. No solid ground, the otherworldly past where pictures reconstruct themselves, colliding, distorted fractal portions that sharpen, blur, and shift. This mind desires to please itself, will relinquish nothing. Archive stench and slap, the same as perfume or caress. Only the story remains, the retelling. Dark Grendel on the prowl. Better perhaps to have 4 legs and a tail, respond eagerly to the body's appetites. Bless the full belly, celebrate the thrill of running until our strength collapses beneath us and we pull ourselves up close against those we belong to, who belong to us. never burdened with the need to make sense of it all. Through story, I reclaimed power over my own path, my history, and let's not forget that history has multiple meanings here. My history no longer held a power over me that felt like slow annihilation. My creative work developed in tandem with my continued efforts to become whole and function in the best possible way. At the same time that I was discovering my particular talents and my creative power, I was also coping with a body that was in deep complaint from the life I had lived. I was born to an alcoholic mother with low birth weight, poorly developed lungs. She smoked Camels and Marlboros, and I had so many respiratory infections, they finally just took my tonsils and adenoids out at age 9 to get me off the antibiotics. I grew up eating fish from a river polluted by paper mills, and we were so poor when I was small that my eldest brother, Tib, was developing rickets from lack of nourishment. Add to this physical abuse, early sexual abuse, and being boarded out with another family to keep social services from taking me away, and you begin to see the obstacles that I faced. I raked blueberries every summer from 3rd grade till age 16, backbreaking work. And that's only one short chapter in my story. If you want to know the rest, you'll have to read the memoir. At age 59 now, I'm healthier than I was at 35. How did this happen? The short answer is that I found the thread of my own story and proceeded to weave a new narrative for myself. I began with massage therapy because I realized that I had to relearn that it was okay for someone to touch me, that it could be soothing. I got counseling, and this helped me to construct a framework that was understandable, a picture of my family dynamics. I read about Indigenous history and civil rights and started to engage in activism. I even studied martial arts for a few years because I knew that I had to find a way to feel powerful and in control of my body again. Then I discovered Indigenous poetry. As I read the work of other Indigenous poets, I felt a fantastic surge of electricity in my body. My mind raced. I made connections between my story and the larger narrative of oppressed Indigenous peoples. Feelings of isolation diminished, and I felt alive in a way I had never felt before. My intellect fully engaged with my sensory experiences. It wasn't always easy, just as not all stories are light and happy. I struggled with immense psychic pain and the need to reconcile my own living reality with the history of colonization. And this was another kind of awakening for me, to discover the power of words and realize that I could shape them however I chose to tell a story aimed to enter the arena of American history. Having felt invisible for much of my life as a mixed-blood Indigenous woman trying to hang on, just trying to survive, I learned I was part of something bigger and something very important, the story of colonization. I was nearly 50 when I decided to enter graduate school and get serious about my writing, and that was a game changer. At the Stonecoast MFA program, I acquired a skill set that allowed me to forge ahead with the writing. The work evolved. I had also started creating art as another path for expression, and the hours I spent painting helped me to slow down and focus on beauty and symbolism. I worked with patterning and color relationships, creating intricately designed medicine wheels. Painting continues to be a key activity for me, and I've been able to use my art to support environmental and social justice causes. You're looking at now a panel from my third semester project at Stone Coast, which was a one-woman multimedia installation at the Abbey Museum in Bar Harbor. I'd never done anything like this in my life, but somehow I found the courage to make a pitch to museum staff, come up with a concept, and design the entire exhibit. This exhibit, titled Look Twice, The Wabanaki Image and Verse, debuted at the Abbey Museum in 2009 and was also shown at the Glickman Library. It includes 12 panels with archival images of Wabanaki people, artifacts, and historic sites that are paired with poems that mediate the historic gaze. There was a time in my life when I had no idea what the historic gaze was even. The Look Twice exhibit gave me an increased public profile, and then through a contact at UNH, Siobhan Senior, I found an editor to work with who was sensitive to my needs, and that was important. I'd been writing a number of poems for at least 2 decades, and with my MFA, my productivity jumped. So the wonderful gift of a professional literary scholar meant that I could put a manuscript together that was coherent, well-sequenced, and tightly written. And this became 20th Century Powwow Playland, published in 2012 by Bowman Books, an imprint of Greenfield Review Press. When the book came out, I realized that now I had to get used to reading those same poems aloud to a room full of strangers, another obstacle. Easy to tell a story on a page, harder to speak it to the world. There are still poems I struggle to read because of the emotional resonance they carry, and I do let people know that the book deals with some very difficult themes and situations. I took stock of this a while back, and I realized the book includes drug abuse, murder, genocide, racism, fractured identity, sexual abuse, and suicide. I remember my cousins from Old Town being at a reading in Bangor one time, and when I walked away, they said, "Geez, Duz, it's pretty downer." I was so thrilled to have them there, though. So now at age 50, oh, where am I? Did I lose my place? Okay. At 59, I'm healthier than I was at 35. The way this happened is that I found the thread of my own story. And then there was also my grandfather, a Maliseet traditional elder who sobered up and helped raise me. He was a humble man, taken at age 8 and sent to residential school. He fought in World War II and had many terrifying experiences. He returned from the war an alcoholic, but he finally got sober and came to live with us. He taught me so many things that I now carry forward as one of the people. That's some of my art. He was born in 1912 and died in 1993. My mother passed from cancer in 1982. My first brother from AIDS in 2005. My eldest brother from complications of alcoholism in 2015. I have one sibling left alive. I tell people that we don't live as long, that we're up against it. We have higher rates of suicide and certain diseases, and that is the reality of being Indigenous. And I'm the last person in my family to have any traditional teaching as I grew up. In 100 years, my family has all but been erased. But I'm still here, and I have many other stories to tell. Thank you. That's me and Joy Harjo.
So for my allotted time, I just thought we could just take about 15 minutes of silence. Just kidding. I'm kidding. Kidding. I'm prepared. I'm glad you laughed. I thought of that in the shower this morning, and I asked my husband if I should say it, and he's like, I don't know. So I'm going to tell you a little about the story the story of my first book, which is a story, a memoir, and sometimes when I tell people, I'm 38, I look 23, but I'm 38, that was a joke. And when I tell people that I wrote a memoir, sometimes I get this sneer like, you're too young to write a memoir. But the thing about memoirs is they're not autobiographies. And even if they were, a 5-year-old can write one. But memoirs to me are like Polaroid snapshots of a moment in a person's life that they want to make sense of. And usually, because they're stories, good memoirs kind of read like novels, they're stories that aren't just a catalog of events, but there's usually a trauma involved and an obstacle that's been overcome. So the narrator, the main character, the protagonist is transformed. It's a story. It's, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. It's a triangle. So what I'm going to do is read just a few pages from the very beginning of my memoir, and I'll tell you how this book came to be, both like from me as a person, as a human trying to sort of exorcise trauma out of her body, and also as a professional writer, because getting a book published, especially when it's memoir, is traumatic on its own. And another really crazy thing that happened today happens to be the 10th anniversary of my husband and me, and this book is about basically our marriage. It was almost a shotgun wedding, except we lost the baby right before the wedding. So that's what this book is about in some ways. But I publish with a pretty good publisher, Soho Press, and usually when you publish a book, your publisher will send you a box of books for you to have that are your own books, like 25 or 50. And that's what they did for me, but I gave them all away because I wanted people to read my book. And then now I often go on Amazon if I have some extra money and buy like really cheap $2 used copies of my own book. And I encourage everyone to buy books from bookstores, especially independent bookstores. It's just better for the bookstores, it's better for the author. Amazon, not so much, unless you buy your own book. So I bought this book from Amazon, and I brought it today, and I was opening it up, and it says in here, Ed Willis, best book I read this year, 2016, and Ed Willis was my husband's high school English teacher from Southern Illinois. Yes, crazy. So that's pretty crazy. So here we go. Okay, chapter 1. The only thing you really have to know about this first chapter is that Maybe is my dog. Her name is Maybe. Okay. Every few Sundays, Segundo, the very short superintendent who lives in the basement at 223 East 32nd Street, opens the back pages of the Village Voice and orders 2 very tall call girls. He doesn't know we know. Segundo avoids all interactions with us. At most, Andrew and I might get a muffled response to the hello we pitch him when one of us is coming and the other is going, but most of the time Segundo just stays in the shadows. Sometimes we'll see him taking out the garbage or hosing down the sidewalk. Once in a while, I'll spot him sitting on the stoop, alone, vacantly staring straight ahead. I find Segundo quite remarkable and often speculate about his place in the universe. What does he eat? And does he cook it or order takeout? Is he Catholic? Has he ever been in agonizing, consuming, can't live without the other person love? His recent haircut, buzzed, I imagine he sheared off his raven black hair by himself in a dimly lit basement of his subterranean apartment, is growing out. Both Andrew and Segundo shaved their heads within the same week. Segundo's grows faster. One recent evening, after arriving home from a walk around the block, the 5 of us, me, my husband Andrew, our little dog Maybe, and 2 long-legged women, clogged the narrow hallway of our apartment building. As the ladies slithered past us, I got close enough to look and notice that they weren't dressed appropriately for the cool October weather. Their skirts were short and sequined. They wore stilettos. They were giggling. To me, they looked like panthers. I nudged Andrew, who was unlocking the door to our bite-sized apartment. As he pushed it open, the 2 women exited the building, and without even a glance, Andrew said, "Look out front. there'll be a man waiting in a minivan. There was indeed. I was stunned. They're prostitutes, he declared. 2 of them? 2 of them. Segundo's been getting busy. No, I don't believe it. Right next to our room. Only a thin wall separates one life from another, but unless we are in the right place at the right time, the truths of others remain unknown. Some choose not to think about it, but I can't help it. The world inside New York City is just a terribly interesting place. Assistant? Andrew asks from the kitchen. Yes, assistant? The cabbage. You got it. Andrew stirs the tomato soup as I step out of the shower and crack open the door a crack. Then, leaning out of the bathroom, stretching my arm into the kitchen, I take the frozen cabbage from him. As I grab it, I see Maybe hovering on the floor by Andrew's feet. She's waiting for fallen scraps. She's 1 year old and a rescue. Andrew adopted her before he met me. Thank you, assistant, I say, and quickly slide back into the bathroom. I'm trying to be polite. I'm trying to be a good wife, but I'm not sure how. The bathroom is less steamy than the kitchen. I set the cabbage down next to the faucet, wipe off my mirror, and look at my face. To me, it looks worn. I blame it on Manhattan. Too frenetic, too cruel. Also, I'm not smiling. I once heard or read somewhere that if you force yourself to smile, the muscles activate something in your brain, trigger synapses or massage a gland, something that makes you feel good. Like a switch to a lever moving a pulley that tilts a bucket and produces a feeling of contentment. All I have to do is turn my frown upside down. Dr. Reich explained that if I stuck frozen cabbage in my bra, things would improve. She said that the common green cabbage has some chemical or enzyme that is used for engorgement therapy. In other words, something in the cabbage stops breasts from producing milk. And if I consistently wear these leaves, production will cease. And I don't need the milk because there is no baby. All that's left is the milk. Dr. Reich used the word engorged. No one has ever used the word engorged in the same sentence as my breasts. Typically, you're going to look at them. They're the size of small plums. That just occurred to me. But not now. This body is not mine. I used to think I had some say in how it conducted itself. I'm 28 years old. The bathroom door is closed, so I am alone. With this hollow rectangle of white painted wood, I've created isolation, solitude. This is all I want. Lately, I don't want to be seen, especially not like this. I don't want my husband to see my skin. Skin provokes primal urges in humans, urges that, unlike my newlywed husband, I am not having. Naked invites sex, and I don't want to initiate anything. Whenever I start to entertain the notion of sex, I just get tired. I just want to sleep. So it's out of the question. He should realize this. How can he not realize this? I shouldn't have to spell it out. I'm tired. I'm angry. I take the cabbage off the counter and slip it into my bra. It's not something I describe as pleasant, the cold, frosty leaves piercing my nipples on contact. In several minutes, they begin to warm, and I will smell like my mother's guamki. At night in bed, I sleep on my back because every time I turn onto my side, my arms squeeze my breasts together like an accordion and they leak milk. It's embarrassing. The stuff goes right through my athletic bra, which I've also been instructed to wear. I don't want Andrew to see any of this. We're to believe big breasts are lovable and playful. Little breasts are cute and sweet. Breastfeeding is beautiful and natural, as long as you do it in private. But what about, and I'm being sarcastic, but what about swollen, leaking breasts with no baby to feed? Would you put this in the same category as burping and passing gas? Functions that sexy women do not do. Do I keep this a secret since it's not sexy? What good is a sad, broken machine? Andrew told me in some sort of attempt to make me laugh again that he would make use of my milk, that he would churn butter or make cheese out of it. What, Parmesan, brie? And we would save money. I did laugh at this. Manhattan is expensive. Okay, so that's a little bit of the first chapter. So I wrote this book 10 years ago when I was in grad school also getting my MFA. And when you're in grad school for nonfiction, when you're writing, you really are thinking and obsessing about what you're writing, so you're not writing something superficial. So I got pregnant in January of the second semester of my first year of grad school. And then the next year, the second year of grad school, I'm supposed to write a thesis. And within the summer of first and second year of grad school, I got pregnant, I lost the baby, and I got married like within a few months. And I had also declared that I wasn't even going to date when I started grad school. And I went to Sarah Lawrence, which is basically all women. So I had a life planned, but then shit happened. So when I returned to grad school, I was writing my grad school thesis about something completely different, had nothing to do with me. It was about like a murder and immigration and sexism, and I couldn't write about anything other than what was consuming me. And it was just so obvious that I had to write my story to get it out of me, I had to turn in work. So this was it. I'd get it out of me. I thought it would just leave my body and I could package it up and move on. So that's what I started doing feverishly. And I wrote the first draft of my book probably within like 3 or so months. And then I was like, well, and then I was meeting women who had also lost a baby in one way or another, but had never talked about it. Friends of my parents, friends of my family, friends of mine, no one wanted to talk about it. So, and when I lost the baby too, I went to the bookstore and I was like, I want to read something about this, find some companionship. And everything was either in the feminist section of the bookstore or it was a medical journal, nothing that was like a friend talking to me, commiserating with me. So I said, well, screw this, I'm going to write this book and help other women. And I'm going to be the Joan of Arc of the uteruses. So I had all these motives to why I was writing this book, or kind of excuses or reasons to write, which we need. We need a motive. We need some kind of ambition or motivation. So I had these, and slowly they started morphing into, like, my ego took over. So it was really, I think I saw it happening, but I didn't. I let it go. I let it run its course. So within a few years, I'm working on this book. I'm becoming more and more aware of feminism and the small pieces of sexism that aren't just so obvious all the time. And also trying to, and also I was just married, so I was like birthed to my feminism and also just married. And I also just had read Mrs. Dalloway, and also watched the movie The Hours. So it was really screwing with my head. So I just put all my hope of feeling better in selling my book. And then I started feverishly investigating the publishing world and how to do it, how to get an agent, who's the best agent. The best agent, by the way, her name is Binky Urban. She's just, the name Binky Urban is like the Devil Wears Prada of agents. What's her name? Anna Wintour of literary agents. So I was like researching the best agents. I'm the best book. I'm going to be the next Liz Gilbert. And when I sell this book, not only am I going to heal, because it'll all have been worth it, but I will help other women, and which these are all valid reasons, but also I'll pay off my grad school loans, which were crazy high. So my husband is like, Mira, you need to like get a job besides the one at this bakery, but what are you gonna do? When are you gonna move on to the next thing? And I'm just like, I'm gonna be rich and famous. You're being sexist. So eventually it didn't work. No, I got an agent, and my first agent was pretty good. She couldn't sell the book, but instead got me a ghostwriting gig to write a nonfiction kids book about the smallest horse ever to be born. And it went on to be a bestseller, New York Times bestseller, and the horse was on Oprah with his owners, who said they wrote the book, while I'm home eating ice cream in my pajamas, not selling my book that's gonna heal all women. So I was a mess. Psychologically, my ego was a hot mess. And so eventually I left my agent. She was like, move on to another book. My therapist said, print out your whole manuscript, print out your book, put it in a box and bury it. And then you'll have moved on. I'm like, I stopped seeing my therapist. And then I got a really great agent after that. I worked on my book more and more because originally the manuscript about becoming accidentally pregnant while taking birth controls, never having missed a day, the manuscript was like really short and just about the trauma that happened. That's it. It was like a short, muscular book. And I started working on it more and more and adding more and more things to it, adding more chapters, because I wanted to, I learned something in my MFA. I wanted to have the reader see, I thought about the reader, like when I'm writing, the thing that makes me get writer's block is to think about this imaginary white, pasty, Caucasian male at the New York Times Book Review who reads my book and is like, she's stupid, she's terrible. So it's always like a very older white male. So I was just so paranoid that my book was bad. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but I was adding more and more layers to my book because I wanted that white male, imaginary Caucasian who hated everything I wrote to also see why a person would make a choice to terminate a pregnancy. That it's not birth control, method of birth control, or it's not because we're lazy or something like that. I wanted to show all the decisions, all the turning points in my life that led up to this one decision that I made that is an abortion, and the publishers wouldn't publish this book because it was an abortion memoir. So I wanted to show readers everything that surrounded this one black dot, whatever that means. It's abstract. I didn't design the cover, but I like it. So I wrote a really damn good book eventually. And I was like, this is a damn good book, and I'm gonna get the best damn agent I can. And the thing I learned about agents is that you don't just want the Anna Wintour of agents. You want, just like with a good marriage or a best friend, you want that person to click with you and understand you. So I had heard a panel before with this agent named Lisa Bankoff, and I really liked her. And I was looking through my notes from grad school, and it said, Lisa Bankoff, query her. So I knew a guy who was her client, who was her author. So I said, Josh, can you put me in touch with Lisa? He put me in touch with Lisa. She read the book over the weekend. She asked if we could talk on the phone. She's also Ann Patchett's agent, humble brag. But I said, can you talk on Monday about your book? And I was like, oh, she's just going to let me down nicely. But she actually loved the book and wanted to send it out immediately to publishers. And again, my ego came back in and like, finally, it's going to be worth it. I'm going to be the next Elizabeth Gilbert. No one wanted the book. Nobody wanted the book. Random House wanted the book, but then the editor that wanted it was let go. So nobody wanted the book. I got responses to the manuscript like, the death of Mira's brother and the abortion just didn't tie together magically enough for me. And so when you're getting responses like that, it really can mess with you. So I was just pissed, and it was just awful, and my husband and I were fighting all the time, and New York was killing us, so we decided one day to throw a dart at the calendar and pick a date and just up and leave New York. And that's what we did. We got our 2 dogs, had an air mattress, and moved to Maine. Just like that. Period. Nothing. I think we had like $1,000. We lived in a Super 8 motel for about a week with 2 dogs. And then we started getting jobs here and there. My husband was working, he has 2 master's degrees. He was working as an alpaca farmhand cleaning up poop because he's a good dude. And we got jobs, and things started unfolding, and we started creating our best life. And then my agent called me and she said, look, and I'd forgotten about the book, kind of. I mean, it was there in my radar because of muscle memory, because my ego's muscle memory, but I forgot about it. And my agent called and she said, you know, I gotta tell you, my boyfriend committed suicide and I'm just really shaken up. I have to let go some clients, and Ann Patchett is selling, you are not. And I love you, but I just can't work on this book anymore. And you should probably move on too. And so everybody was saying, just, you know, you just got it out of your system, just let it go and move on to the next book. But instead, I did what you're not really supposed to do, and I started sending it on my own to publishers, which you're really not supposed to do. Because they'll be like, who are you? And who's your agent? I want like the go-between. I want your realtor. So I literally pressed send on my phone from the toilet when I was going to the bathroom and sent this book. I was just blind, just like, oh, I'm just gonna screw it. I'm gonna send it to this agent. So I sent it to this publishing house called Soho Press, and got an email from the editor saying he wanted to talk about the book. And again, I'm like, he's gonna let me down easy because it's about losing a child and a brother. And instead he said, we love it, we wanna publish it. Period. That was it. That was it. All this ego and stuff mixed into just like, bloop, and it was published, and then it came out into the world. So my point is, when you're writing about, so that's kind of like a Cliff Notes version of how randomly it is to get a book published. It happens differently all the time. But also, if you're writing about trauma, you have to, well, you don't have to, because I didn't do it, but you want to take care of yourself. You're gonna be exploring this awful, I mean, I have a car crash scene in here in which my brother is killed. I have the 3-day-long procedure in which seaweed sticks are put into my cervix to expand them. I had just awful stuff, and I wasn't really taking care of myself during or really after for a long time until the book came out. And after the book came out, I had already had a son, Theo, and I went on book tour with my 3-month-old daughter. And after I had kids, I just cared more about life and living than this being everything that is me. So it's a very delicate balance. So you want to make sure when you're writing about those hard, traumatic points, number one, you want to take care of yourself. Number two, speaking craft-wise, you want there to be more than this happened to me, and this is the horrible thing that happened. Because there's this great writer, Joanne Beard. She's fabulous. Look her up, Joanne Beard. She's an amazing writer, and we came to her memoir writing workshop with all our terrible stories, and she's like, oh, you were sexually abused by a priest? Oh, da-da-da. There's nothing new under the sun. So you have to have a new way of telling it. You want to have prose that's beautiful, understand what you're trying to say and have a point other than this happened to me. But on top of that, am I almost done on time? On top of that, you want to have events that led up to the events that led up to the events that led to that. So that's more three-dimensional. And I'm almost out of time, but another thing I want to tell you is that I also teach memoir writing in prison, in a women's prison. And most of the women I teach have killed someone. They're in for life. Most of them have killed their husbands, so I'm like, okay, I get it. But some of them, not so much. And they have terribly awful stories or paragraph descriptions in the newspaper of what landed them in prison. So as a memoir writer, I felt it was my duty to say, okay, we got to write the big bad thing. We got to write about the horrible thing you did and it happened to you. But I found out when I was pregnant with my daughter that one of my favorite inmates had killed her daughter. And that day I was like, great, because how am I supposed to sign this? And also, how do I move forward? But I knew so much about them other than the traumatic thing that the horrible things that they had done didn't matter to me. And I knew who they were because of all the other things we wrote about besides the one big thing. So my advice to you is when you go out and write, save that really hard chapter for when you're ready, but write about everything else and go through the back door. Go through the back door when you write your book. Write about the last time you wore a dress. That'll lead you closer to the big thing. Write directions to your childhood home, stopping at little places and giving anecdotes of the place. So you want to paint a fuller picture so your reader will be entertained, but also develop empathy of how you make decisions and how you function as a human. So anyway, buy my book. And the next book I'm writing, it's due soon, but it's coming out in about a year, called The In-Betweens, and it's about women, mediums, and psychics, and it's nonfiction. So it's gonna be super fun. Thank you.
Hi, Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you at this wonderful conference. The topic is so compelling that when Kathleen invited me to be part of it, I just couldn't say no. And Mihku, I am a fellow daughter of a Marlboro smoking mother who had respiratory problems in her early childhood as a result. And Mira, thank you for the wonderful, entertaining account of your catastrophes.
Glad they could make everyone laugh.
Aspirations. In the early days of September 1979, with my only child just off to his first year at an expensive college, I found myself suddenly without a job. Though I had a contract for another year of teaching at Oak Grove Coburn School, a nominally Quaker secondary school in Vassalboro, their enrollment had tumbled over the summer, and the headmaster called the morning I came home to empty nest syndrome to say that I could teach one section of English for 1/5 of my contracted annual salary. It was September 5th, and there wasn't a full-time English teaching position open in the state of Maine. I won't take the time here to elaborate on what brought me to this state, other than to intimate that I was no fan of the headmasters, who was himself no fan of transparency in governance or student rights or collaborative education. And my image each morning in the mirror warned me that I could not in good conscience go along with his policies. I turned down the offer of a 1/5 livelihood and set out to cobble a new way of earning a living. That first semester, I held down 9 part-time jobs. One going door to door for the Census Bureau, another teaching state employees how to write to get it right, which amused me no end because I felt like the poet in disguise that I was as I taught caseworkers and office managers the difference between the passive and active voice. Not the problem will be looked into as soon as possible, but I will look into the problem and get back to you tomorrow. Yet another of my 9 jobs would have lasting consequences for the person I've grown to be. My friend, the artist Natasha Mayers, got me a gig leading a fortnightly creative writing workshop for adults recovering from mental illness at the Link Club, living in the community, now the Link Wellness Center in Augusta. I was somewhat better qualified for this position. I was a published poet who had earned most of a meager income for 15 years as a visiting poet in K-12 classrooms around the state. 10 years earlier, I had led a similar workshop at the Augusta Mental Hospital. I still remember the day when 2 people at the writing workshop that we were doing there announced that they were Jesus at the same time. But I had no formal training in psychology or the healing arts, which wasn't even a thing then. Just a passion for poetry, a love of teaching, and a felt affinity for people struggling with mental illness, whose shadow flew like a bat around my own family. 31 years and many life changes later, the Link Writing Workshop is still meeting, and I'm still facilitating it. 2 of the members of the original group still come to our meetings. Others joined 15, 10, or 5 years ago and have stayed to make their contributions. Still others come and go. I usually bring a sampling of poems from a single published poet whose work I admire for us to read, discuss, and be inspired by. I also bring an old tin box that originally held gourmet chocolates and now is filled with words on small paper strips that we use to make poems or stories containing words each participant has chosen at random. These collaborative word box poems are often funny and fantastical. The Link Writing Workshop is a community of friends knit together by years of acquaintance, sharing work, I always write too, good listening, and trust. We honor each other's imaginations and encourage each other to take leaps with form and subject matter. In short, we're not much different from any other working artists who are lucky enough to have formed a community supportive of their work. Our writing, like that of many other artists, may begin in trauma, but it does not end there. There are the delights of language itself. There is what Emily Dickinson dubbed the superb surprise, when words take the writer in an unexpected direction and undeniable truths spill onto the page. When that happens, the world stops for an instant. An exhilarating sensation of freedom overtakes the writer's body, not by design, but because freedom and the healing that comes of it, given the chance, are a spontaneous and organic process, one that the whole group comes to share in. A frequent topic of conversation at the workshop is the contrast between the nurturing space we make together and the violence we encounter in the world at large. Most of the members of the group did not begin as children of privilege. To compound family and financial stresses, to be labeled mentally ill almost guarantees that a person in this society will end up living in poverty, navigating the cumbersome mental health bureaucracy to secure affordable housing and transportation to doctor's appointments, and manage shifting diagnoses and prescriptions. At the best of times, it's quite a skill set. But the services necessary to help the mentally ill develop autonomy and satisfying lives are the ones most likely to be cut when bureaucrats look to blame the wounded for their misfortunes. Veterans of the mental health system know firsthand where America's priorities do and don't lie. Just who is it who's sick here? The irony does not go unnoticed, as you will hear in this poem by Ruth Cohen, one of the original and longest-term participants in the workshop. Her poem, Evil, poses a fundamental paradox of human existence. Am I good? Am I evil? Are you evil? Are you good? I do not know what is real. Are there wars? Is this world really barbaric? I know when I have disturbing thoughts, I could hurt someone in my head. What is psychology? I'm changing. But what the hell is going on? When I was young, I had times when I was talkative, and other times I wasn't. Does Saddam Hussein, here substitute your favorite contemporary dictator, have schizophrenia? Sometimes I think there are no wars, that people try to help one another. This may be what I love most about the time I spend at the writing workshop, that what arises from trauma is so often compassion, that in finding it in our own writing, we learn to extend it to others. On that note, I'll conclude with an excerpt from another poem by Ruth, followed by a short poem of my own that I hope embodies what I've aspired to communicate in this presentation. Long night ahead. Time passes by. A subway train comes to a stop. As I pick up my quarter, next to me is a man playing his guitar. Every day I come to the same spot where I hear the music. One day a man came up to me. He said, "I'm looking for a challenge. I want to be the best at what I do." I looked at him and said, "What do you do?" "I fix watches," he said. "I've been fixing watches for the past 20 years, and now I'm homeless." I turned to this man who was in his 50s and said, "I can put you back in business. Just fix my watch." Time passed by. Every day I gave him a watch to fix. Then one day I met a friend who said he could give the homeless man a job. Long night ahead. Time passes by. A subway train comes to a stop. As I pick up my quarter, next to me is a man playing his guitar. Every day I come to the same spot where I hear the music. Now this poem of mine. Aspirations. My one God is not a God of one truth only. Make of your ear a hopper, the teacher said. Moths rise from my blanket. Moths fly from my tongue. Still, I aspire to be kind and patient. If I had an olive tree, she would be my mother, my steadfastness. I would protect her from those who would do her harm. The blue world falters. Rockets pummel the dusty streets. I close my eyes and remember a dialogue of fingers, the taste of a lover's mouth. How we argued about everything, the sky, the moths, the nature of human nature. How the blue world falters. Sonar strands pods of dolphins, their glossy eyes go dim. The shadow of a nipple clouds the X-ray of my lung. I lay me down. I become my olive tree. My limbs send out rootlets. I attend to the body's language, study the words of the sages to acquire a discerning heart. Thanks.
What are your projects? Are you writers or health workers, students, people? Are there any people working on books? Yeah.
Well, if nobody's going to say anything, I'd just like to thank the three of you for spreading so many riches that I am hungry for.
Is your name Martin?
Yeah.
When I first came to Maine, I attended the Salt Institute, and Erica, did she do a photograph? What was her last name? Erica something or other. She was my collaborator, and I remember, this is about 15 years ago.
Oh, boy.
She did a documentary on you.
On me.
Of you.
And her.
Yes. Oh, good. Yeah.
You need to use it for
You've been around this
recording
block, Callie. You
essays.
know I'm going to make you use it. I just want to say all three of you are wonderful, wonderful storytellers. And I think that's really at the heart of this, is to hear your voices. So thank you.
Thank you.
I just really like the title of this workshop. Each time I write this story, I mean, it's like this story changes all the time, and I think you all spoke really well to that, and I appreciate it. But it is this story. I don't know, it's such a great title, and I thank the organizers, and you're all great, really. Thank you.
And I'll just mention that, thank you, that was very kind. All of the quotations that start the panel titles come from Martha Hall's books.
I just had a question. A lot of the writing was about trauma, and I was wondering how you deal with, if you're ever attacked for being so transparent about that, and how you deal with it if you do, if you are.
I haven't yet. My family is, we like discuss our bowel movements. We're very, very transparent people. The only attack I think I may have gotten that I came across would be like a book review or reading my own Amazon reviews. Stupid thing to do. But I'm married to an Excel worksheet. My husband is a structural engineer, and his family does not talk about feelings. So I've learned in general as a human that's transparent and a sharer of feelings who cannot do math whatsoever and still counts on her fingers, that doesn't have to change. But I stick to my truth, but I don't tell other people what their truths are. The only time I've been attacked was by my father's sisters, who are very Catholic, very Catholic. Their names are Mary Madeline, Mary Virginia, and Mary Joan. And one of them has 11 kids, and 2 of them are priests. 3 of them are priests. So the only attack I got out of this memoir was not the fact that I terminated a pregnancy. Their critique was that I used a line, straight out of my father's words, that his mother called him Chief Wetapants of the Never Dry tribe when he peed the bed as a kid, and then rubbed his face in poopy underwear once, because it's true. But I didn't say that to spite anyone. I use as an example in a section in the book about my father, showing that he came from a very unloving childhood and ended up being this like sweet Jesus Christ meets Steve Martin kind of person, like if they birthed a baby, just to show that he's incredible. So because of that line in the book, they kind of abandoned me. And I feel kind of bad about that, but I know that the reason I put that in the book wasn't to hurt anybody, just to show a bigger picture. It's really hard to write about other people, I think. It's not as hard for me to write about myself.
For myself, the most difficult thing, which is why I waited so long to write a memoir, was considering the fallout from my family. One of the things that has happened when the book came out is that I found myself often in situations where there was a sort of an objective gaze. And it's almost as if there's an expectation about, oh, you poor mixed blood Indian person. So I had to find a way to make that sharing more of an empowering thing. But I can tell you that, like, my poetry was getting published before the book came out in anthologies, and I did have my maternal grandmother who disowned me and never spoke to me again. She lived nearly to be 100. She was maybe 2 days off of her 100th birthday, but she never spoke to me again. And I think that, that is something that belongs to her. Somehow she had sort of mythologized our family history and the realities around that and did not feel comfortable with any of those truths being public.
As a teacher, when I was teaching in the Poets in the Schools program, what I did encounter was censorship of students' work. I remember a student who was just angry and defiant and obviously a wounded soul, who wrote a poem that had the word ass in it. And it was a breakthrough poem. It was the first thing that she had actually opened up and written in the whole semester that we'd worked together. And when the issue of the magazine came out, there was a blank space where her poem should have been, because the assistant superintendent of the district had been alerted by the secretary who was putting the issue together that word was in there. I thought that was the cruelest thing that I had ever heard of.
Fortunately, we're out of time. But I would encourage you all to seek each other out during lunch, which is going to be served in the tent outside the campus center. And we will be back in this space again at 1:30 for Hetty Wald's keynote address. So please carry on the conversations that have started here, and Mihku has books that she'll sell you if, and I think Sherry also has books now. So you can find each other, and we'll see you back here at 1:30.